In today's video, we're going to learn how to correctly size and cut common rafter tails so that your fascia trim lines up exactly as you planned it. Because this video covers mostly rafter tails and fascia trim, and I've made a lot of other YouTube videos on how to cut rafters, common rafters, in this video I'll simply quickly cover two methods for calculating and cutting common rafters. Method 1, using an equation. This first method uses a simple calculation that you can use on any calculator, even the one on your phone. This equation calculates the diagonal measurement of the rafter. Diagonal length equals total run divided by unit run times length of common rafter per foot of run. To use this equation, you need four pieces of information: total run, unit rise, length of common rafter per foot of run. And don't worry, it's easier than it sounds. Step 1, total run. The total run is half the total span of the roof minus half the thickness of the ridge board. For our roof, the total span is 40 3/4 of an inch. Divide that in half to get 20 3/8, and then subtract 3/4 of an inch since our ridge board is 1.5 inches thick. This gives you a total run of 19 5/8 or 19.625. Step 2 is unit run. Unit run is straightforward for a common rafter roof because it's always 12 inches. Step 3, unit rise. The unit rise is an amount the roof rises per 12 inches of run. For this roof, I've chosen a 5-inch rise, which is not too steep nor too shallow. Step 4, length of common rafter per foot of run. This value can be found on a framing square or online. For a unit rise of 5 inches, the length of common rafter per foot of run is 13. With all the values determined, we can now calculate the diagonal rafter length. 19.625 divided by 12 times 13 equals 21.26. So the rafter length is 21 1/4 inches. Method 2, using a construction calculator. Before we move on, I want to quickly share something that can take your woodworking and carpentry skills to the next level. My online Skool community is a space where beginner to intermediate woodworkers and carpenters come together to learn, share tips, and improve skills. You'll get exclusive content, discussions, and rewards for participating. Plus, you'll get access to weekly Zoom calls while I'll be on there to help you directly. If this sounds like something you would enjoy, click the link below to learn more. The second method utilizes a calculator or an app, which you may need to purchase. First, enter 19.625, which is the total run, and press the Run button. Second, enter 5, which is the pitch or the unit rise, and press the Pitch button. And lastly, press the diagonal button and the calculator will display 21.26, which is 21 1/4, the same result as before. With the rafter length figured out, let's go ahead and lay one out. First is the ridge cut line. Use a framing square set to 12-inch unit run and a 5-inch unit rise. Draw the ridge cut line and cut it out with a circular saw. Number 2 is the diagonal measurement. Hook your tape measure at the ridge point and measure down and mark the diagonal length at 21 1/4 inches. Step 3 is the heel cut. Slide the framing square down to the diagonal point and draw another plumb line. This is called the outside building line or the heel cut. And last, number 4 is the seat cut. For our mock-up, the outside walls are 2x4s, which measure 3.5 inches wide. So we're going to slide the framing square up and use its scale to mark 3.5 inches. Draw this line, and this will get cut out later. The final step then is to figure out and lay out for the soffit overhang. For this small roof, an 8-inch overhang will be plenty. However, the standard is typically more around 12 inches. To lay this out, simply measure outward from the exterior building line 8 inches and mark and draw a line using the framing square to indicate the fascia line or the total amount of overhang. At this point, it's time to figure out what type of fascia material we're going to use and where to draw the soffit cut line. Typical fascia trim is going to be either 1x6 or 1x8. 1x8 being probably the most common, but for this little mock-up roof here, 1x8 would just be too big. So I'm going to go with a 1x6 just so it looks more to scale. Looking back at our mock-up now, you can see that if I pull a tape measure, I have an 8-inch overhang, but that includes the sub-fascia, which is this board here. Let's lay out that location of the sub-fascia now. Simply use the square as the 1.5-inch spacer and draw another line on the right side. With the sub-fascia line now drawn, it's time to draw this soffit cut line. Now there's a few different ways that you can do this, but I've always been a big fan of making a mini mock-up so I can visually see what it's going to look like once it's done. Having a visual aid is always a good idea. The first piece to go in place is the sub-fascia. The top is beveled at about 23 degrees. I found that by using a straight piece of wood, in this example, holding it on the pivot point of the speed square, and then pivoting the board over to the pitch of the roof, which is 5. Now all I have to do is read the scale at the bottom, which reads 23 degrees. With the sub-fascia now in place, you can see exactly where the soffit cut line is. Make a mark and use your framing square to draw the bottom soffit cut line. Looking again at our mock-up, you can see that I have the trim tucked under the plywood. You don't have to lay it out that way, but if I have time, I prefer to lay it out this way. If I take a piece of our trim and run it up the sub-fascia until it comes in line with the top edge of the rafter, that should be perfect. Again, if you choose to run it up higher, the plywood will stop short of overhanging the fascia trim. However, the drip edge will cover this, and in most cases, you will have no problems down the road. I'll slide it back down, and now you can see the amount of reveal or space left from the bottom of the sub-fascia and the trim board. In my case, I'll be using a 1/2-inch thick finished soffit trim, which, once installed, will leave about a 1/2-inch reveal. If you're using different trim than I am, then you're going to need to adjust these numbers. That's why I feel really strongly about making a mock-up of your specific size and thickness of the trim you're using. It's really a foolproof way to make sure that everything lands perfectly. With the plywood pieces held in position, you can see exactly what our finished product will look like. At this point, it's time to cut the rafters. As a reminder, you need to cut out the bird's mouth here, the soffit line, and the fascia cut line here. With all of the rafters installed and the sub-fascia cut and installed, you can see things are starting to take shape. As a reminder, if you need more info on rafters, I have detailed videos on my channel. Next, we'll install the plywood. Remember, the plywood needs to hang down past the sub-fascia. In our example, that would be about 5/8 of an inch. I'm using a 24-inch wide piece of plywood, so I would simply overhang my tape by 5/8 of an inch and mark the tape at the 24-inch mark. Then I would pull a chalk line across the rafters and align the top edge of the plywood with the chalk line during installation. Finally, for the basic version of this trim detail, you would install the trim as the roof is framed now, mitering the corners or using a simple butt joint. If you choose to go with a butt joint, install the fascia first and then the rake trim so that you don't see the joint from the side of the roof and water flows down the rake without entering the joint. A complete installation guide of the fascia trim and the rake trim will have to be for another video, but at least now you know exactly how to cut your rafter tails to work with your specific trim. Before you go, I want to invite you to my private Skool community. It's a perfect place to get step-by-step guidance, ask questions, and connect with other beginners in woodworking and carpentry. And here's the best part. If you join this week, you'll get instant access to this week's 1-hour Q&A session, where I'll be there to help answer any of the questions you have about tools, projects, or anything really carpentry or woodworking related. To learn more, click the link below to join, and I'd love to see you there.